Not all car lifts are created equal, and not all metal buildings are ready for one. If you don't plan ahead, you could have a cracked slab, wasted resources like money, and a lift that you can't even use. So let's walk through everything you need to know about a car lift in a metal building.
Back at the Wolf.
Welcome back, Pack. This is episode number 3 for MetalTalks, where we're talking about real challenges and how we help solve them. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about car lifts, especially for metal buildings, because it is a very common request. And we have a special guest here, and that is our planning manager, James. Welcome to the channel. How are you feeling today?
Feeling great. Excited.
Well, James, I would love to introduce you. I know you are very passionate about cars, and you have a long history about them. So now we're going to be talking about how that world combines with the metal building world. So talk to me. How did you get into cars, or why are you an enthusiast about them?
Well, you can blame my dad for that. He was the type that, you know, being the older range, or the older age guys, where they were too cheap to actually pay anybody to fix it. So if something was broke, he's like, hey, let's go out and figure out how to fix it. So that's how we learned, just hands on. And it progressed through my time, you know, in the Navy. I was always wrenching on stuff, always buying cars, building cars, much to my wife's probably frustration. Thank you, appreciate that. So I was always buying and selling cars, fixing stuff up. I have 3 sons, and I got pictures of my kids reading, you know, Chilton's manuals when they were like 2.5 years old. So they're kind of forced into it. But after I retired from the Navy, I actually started a shop in Hawaii. So if you're a fan of the page or a fan of the YouTube channel, you've probably seen Ernesto's videos of, you know, the pricing video when we have this client that's in Hawaii. Well, that's me. And now I'm wearing the WolfSteel logo. Crazy turn of events. But so I had a shop in Hawaii. My son and I had a shop in Hawaii because we were always into cars, and my wife wanted to stay there. So we're like, okay, well, we got to open a shop. So we had a shop there specializing in off-road and performance cars. And I have a lot of peers and a lot of friends that were over in Hawaii that were shop owners. So I kind of gleaned a lot of their knowledge, went to their shops and kind of looked at like what lifts they had and things like that. And so it's important to me because, you know, a lot of people are like, hey, you can grab a $1,500 lift off of Amazon or off of, you know, eBay or something like that, or you can buy a used one from Marketplace. But if I'm going to put my kid under it, you know, I wanted it to be done right. I wanted it to be anchored right. So we checked into the concrete requirements, the anchoring requirements, the different styles and different brands. And there's different brands and, you know, different quality of where they're made or the quality control and things like that. So it's important for me, if I'm going to put my kid under it, you know, put my family under it, it's got to be done right. But there's so many options with lifts. You know, now I'm here because going through the process with Ernesto and meeting Jared, you know, when he came out, we were inspecting my building. When we did get my building built, you know, I kind of fell in love with WolfSteel and like, hey, let's pump the brakes on my business and let's do this. So, but behind it, you know, I sit with all the sales guys. So behind, I always hear like, okay, well, what kind of lift are you thinking about putting in your building and, you know, things like that. And so I'm like, okay, well, you know, how thick is his slab and how tall is his leg height of his building and everything? Cause I kind of geek out on that stuff. My shop in Hawaii and also my shop here, you know, I had grid paper and I have like cars and I'm like positioning, figuring out where the fitment is, where the best fitment is. And kind of plan it like that. Well. Right.
Awesome. Well, hey, we're going to answer a lot of those questions. We have a lot of the frequently asked questions. And that's how this episode is going to be carried out. There's going to be questions specifically about car lifts, like from the concrete requirements, from lift clearances, overhead doors, and much more. MetalTalks was created because we see and hear about the biggest challenges and frustrations and nightmares in the metal building industry. We pull comments and questions directly from social media, our clients, and our experiences, and we break them down right here. Quick disclaimer, this is just our opinions, so if you don't like our answers, it's okay. Go grab a beer, go grab some coffee, and just remember, we're just Texas metal builders talking on the internet. Question number 1. So, James, talk to me. What are the most common car lifts that we see our clients, especially and we're talking really for residential use, you know, like you have your garage, your workshop. What are the most common car lifts that, you know, clients get?
Well, there are a handful. There's many different manufacturers, but there's also a bunch of different styles of lifts. And sometimes when clients call, they don't know what lift they want. So this could also be beneficial to them to help guide and choose, because some lifts are good for certain things and they're terrible for other things. And in no way am I endorsing the different brands. I have certain brands that I'm used to seeing that are popular, that were in, you know, other shops that I've used, that you see on TV, things like that. And you kind of look at, like BinPack, for instance, is a very high quality lift company, manufacturer. You can go on their website, and even if you're not using one of their lifts, it talks about like the heights, the widths, so it kind of gives you the placement details in your shop. But they also talk about the concrete specs, and they've done a lot of their research. And there's even questions, like I had questions about it, like something wasn't clear, you call, they answer, and they answer, you know, all the questions. So they're very forthcoming with information. They're not trying to
have some questions on like some of those specs, especially for the concrete, and you guys made that call. And and
they were awesome. They were super helpful. They answered questions right away. They're knowledgeable, and they're reachable. That's another plus. You know, you may not be able to reach some of the other companies if you buy one off of, you know, a used or something like that. But so I mean, there's a multitude of brands, but I would say the three most popular styles of lifts, and I'll start with the least popular, is a scissor lift.
The scissor lift.
Scissor lift is one you'll pull in and you'll drive. Your car basically straddles it, and it comes up kind of like a scissor. You get underneath, you kind of adjust the pads, and you lift it up. So those are great for, you know, you'll see them a lot of in shops that do wheels and brakes, tires, wheels, brakes, things like that, because it's underneath, the tires will droop, and then you can work on brakes or whatever. But you can't do like exhaust on it, or it's very difficult to do exhaust, because everything is, you know, the entire underside of your vehicle is kind of captured by the lift mechanism. So you can't, it's hard to do oil changes unless, you know, because there's bars going across and everything, reinforcement. So those are good for certain things, but if you're going to be doing like exhaust work, changing the transmission, sometimes they're in the way. So it's kind of difficult to use.
That makes sense.
And then after scissor lifts, I would say the next would be the 4-post lifts. And, you know, we'll call them a 4-post lift basically because you have the 4 legs, the 4 posts. You'll drive up on it. And these are popular for oil change places or even alignment racks, because they'll have little plates they can go on up front, where when they're adjusting it, the tires aren't like, you know, screeching on a solid ground. They're actually able to be maneuvered a little bit. The 4 posts take up a lot more room. They're usually wider than a 2 post, and they're usually longer than a 2 post. They are great if you do exhaust work or things like that. If you're doing like brakes, wheels, tires, you know, it's at ride height. So that's what's great about if you're checking suspension, if you're doing exhaust, because if you did it say you drooped all the suspension out, you know, everything's hanging, and you put your exhaust up and you lower it back down, all of a sudden you're crunching your exhaust tubes. So there's certain reasons why you'd use different lifts. Those are nice. You can add, there's a carriage that goes across where you can raise the front or raise the rear, and you can do more, but they're not as easily accessible underneath and everywhere for your car.
Oh, so like that 4-post lift, are they movable or?
They are, and some of them even have wheels where you could, you know, kind of push them down and slide them over. Most 4-posts don't need to be anchored. The same thing as the scissor lifts. Most of the time they're not bolted down. 4-posts, they'll have the pads and they'll have the holes where you could anchor them if you never plan on moving them. 4-posts don't usually get anchored. And there's usually the concrete's not as important as say a 2-post, you know, as the thickness requirements or anchorage requirements or anything like that, because the vehicle weight and the lift weight is spread on 4 posts instead of 2. And you don't have like that lateral loading that you would have on a 2-post.
That makes sense.
They're also great. You know, you see a lot of guys use them as a stacker, and they actually have 4 posts that you can actually stack multiple cars on. And even in residential,
2 posts?
Yeah, on the 4 post.
Oh, on a 4 post. Yeah, I'm like, 2 posts.
So I'll get to the 2 posts. You can actually stack them on that too. Park one underneath.
We had a client, and we actually have it on our YouTube. He has a collection of vehicles, and he had it. If I'm not mistaken, we can pull that video shot, but this 4-post, and it had, it had a car stacked up there, and the car at the bottom, so.
And they actually have those where those 4-post, you can do like 3 cars or even 4 cars. You lower all the pads or all the platforms down. You pull one, you raise it all the way up, or you raise it up. You pull the next car in, raise it up, and pull the next. So I've seen them like 3 or 4 high.
Damn.
But you can also link them together side by side. We had a customer in Hawaii that had some very high-end cars, but he was in a residential area. So in his 2-car, he would pull his 2 cars in, raise them up, park his other ones under. So he had like Lambo, GTR.
Damn.
He had some stuff. But you can use those as stackers. So you can kind of maneuver them around your shop. If you change on a 4-post, if you don't anchor it, it's a little bit easier. Like, I don't really like the location. I want to be able to do something else. It's a little bit easier to move over.
That makes sense.
Because it's not anchored. So the most popular is going to be the 2-post. 2-post lifts, obviously as the name intends, explains it's 2 legs, 2 posts. Those are anchored. So you kind of have to know where you want it. The beauty about the 2-post, most of them like say a bin pack. Bin pack is a very popular one. You say, okay, my car weighs 5,000 pounds. So people look at a lift and they're like, okay, well, if I find a lift that's 5,000 to 6,000 pounds, that's not how you judge the weight on it. It's kind of like when you do, like for a Jeep, if you put a winch on it, if your Jeep weighs 5,000 pounds and you're going to get a 5,000 pound winch, it's not going to help you at all. So you always overshoot the weight capacity. So on a lift, on a 5,000 pound vehicle, 10K is the most popular lift. That it won't struggle when you're lifting it. It just goes straight up, no big deal. 10K is the most popular. If you have like big trucks, you're working on diesel trucks, crew cab, long bed, stuff like that all the time, then they'll do like a 12K, or you can go all the way up. They even have more you can put buses on them, like school buses on them.
Yeah.
So
on a 2-post,
they have some that are crazy. The weight requirement.
The arm has got to be.
Yeah. So they'll have like the utility trucks, the big old utility trucks. They have those on there and everything. So. They are a little bit different. So with the 2-post, the way they used to do it was all the, you have your 4 arms that kind of stick out. They would all be the same, and you would just center the vehicle and lift it. Well, the problem with that, you'd have to do like, Bo and Luke Duke, Duke's a Hazard, where you have to crawl out the window because you couldn't open the door. So the way they change it is that used to be a symmetric. Now it's asymmetric. So where the car sits a little bit further back, and while it's lifted, while it's on the arms, you can still swing your door open. What that does is it helps because now it kind of moves the center of gravity, but then you really have to pay attention to anchorage, because it's not just straight up and down center of gravity. You're putting that lateral loading on it. That's why concrete and anchorage is so important. But on those lifts, like say, a 10K lift from bin pack or different companies, they'll have a couple different designs that you have that plays into when we choose placement of in the building. They have what they call a floor plate because they have to be linked. They have hydraulic hoses that run across. They have cables for the brake release that run across. They have a chain, almost like a big bike chain that runs across. And that either has to go across on the floor or it has to go on the top. So on the floor, they call it like a floor plate, sill plate, something like that. But it's pretty heavy duty. It's pretty big. So if you have a lowered car, you're like, crack, 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 going over it. And it's always kind of a pain, especially if you have to push. It's a broken car and you're pushing it in, you got to do repairs on it. You got to launch that thing over that sometimes. So they'll have what's called a clear floor. So the clear floor takes everything away, nice and smooth floor, which is great if you have a car or a lift in your building and you need to pull your lawnmower in or whatever. You're not using the lift all the time. Clear floor is nice to have.
That makes sense.
But then you have it across the top. So what they do with that is all the linkage, all the hoses and everything is across the top, and they'll have a little padded bar that goes across. So when you go up and it touches the roof of the car, it stops. So you don't, try to crush your car. Yeah. So that's a safety up there.
Yeah.
Like so it stops. Yep. Yeah. It's just a little dip switch on the side, a little momentary switch. And whenever you hit that little padded, just a bar runs across. Once you touch that, it kills the lift and it says you're at your limit. But the thing with that is you have to pay attention to leg height of our buildings. Because some of those lifts say they're 12 foot high. But if a customer says, "Ooh, I found this lift," and they make a 10K lift that there's 4 different heights that go all the way up to like 15 or 16 feet. The 2 posts actually extend up. So if you have a tall vehicle, Yep. So if you have a tall vehicle, say you work on trucks all the time, or you work on SUVs that are kind of tall all the time, and you don't want to go up until it touches, and then you're slouched down. My kid's like 6'7". So he's under the car, and he's kind of crimped over, folding his neck over or spreading his feet apart, or and it's just always that uncomfortable height. So you can get the taller height lifts, but then you have to take into account, how tall is your building? If you call and you order, HOA requires like an 8-foot leg height, and you want a 14-foot, it may cause some issues. So that's why proper planning is important.
Interesting. So you gave us a really good rundown of what like the 2-post, the 4-post, and the scissor lifts.
Right.
And we kind of touched a little bit onto the next question, which is going to be, what is the absolute minimum ceiling height or leg height that is needed in the metal building for a car lift? To specifically answer those questions, talk to me, James, based on what we were just talking about, like 2-posts and then the 4-posts. So the 2-post, I'm assuming, has a little bit more because of the top bar, compared to the 4-post doesn't really have a top bar.
Right.
What is your opinion on the heights of that?
So it's always beneficial if the client knows exactly which lift is going to install. But if they don't know yet, then we just kind of tell them like, hey, you're a 12-foot leg height, you want this. You kind of take that into account. That's why whenever you look at those, it has the exact schematics of, how high the legs will go or the arms will go up when you're lifting the vehicle, how tall the very top of it, the, uppermost part, how wide it is at the outside of the beams, how narrow. I mean, it goes through everything. But for most of them, most guys, most people, the common height is going to be 12 foot at the top of the post, at the top of the beam. So then you kind of have to play with placement inside the shop. So if we do a 30 wide, 30 wide tubular, then say a 12-foot leg height, you're golden. But say HOA doesn't allow a 12-foot leg height and you have to do an 11. Well, that may mean that you can't put it so close to the wall, because you have the truss, then you have the brace bar that goes across. But, I think a lot of people, whenever you think of 12-foot leg height, they think that you go up and you draw a line 12 foot across. And that's not the case. You have that room in the eave and the peak.
For a tubular building.
Right. So you have extra room. So you would just have to say, okay, if you have a lesser leg height, then you may have to center it or move it over a little bit more. So kind of placement comes into play.
Because the trusses and marketing help us out, but they have that bar that takes away from your full roof pitch. Right. And then there's another way to increase the height of your building, which is through the roof pitch. Right. So standard is 312. You can go up to, like we've had clients go up to 612 roof pitch for our tubular buildings. And so the truss design is really, really important to just take into consideration. And then the corner bracing, but I don't think so unless you're really getting to the edge, the corners.
Right.
Bracing.
The knee bracing in the corners.
The knee brace.
You would have to be really close because those are usually, depends on the height, depends on the size of the building. They're either going to be 3 foot or 4 foot. So 4 foot at a 45 degree, it's not too intrusive, because if you had your post like all the way up against your wall, like you did a really narrow one, then we'd have to take it into account. But if you're 2 feet away from the wall, which is probably a minimum of what I would suggest, you have ample room.
Gotcha. It's still, especially because they got to be walking around. If you're working with your cars, I'm assuming you'll have to still place it a little bit out, right?
Right. Yeah, and you have to plan on, usage. What you're racking, what kind of vehicle you're putting on it, if you need access, if you have family coming out there all the time, or for me, I had to be concerned about clients coming, and I couldn't have them walking. So I had to have a thoroughfare, I had to have a little safe alleyway for them to go, because I can't have them walking underneath a lifted vehicle.
That makes sense.
So yeah, you kind of, placement is key. Placement's important, and that's also where garage doors, overhead doors come into play.
Yep.
Roll-up doors are easy because they just kind of roll up and they're there out of the way. But if you do an overhead door, you have to pay attention to that. Do I have a 12-foot door as it's open? Because I've actually seen guys hit the garage door opener. One of my dad's friends had a very, very, very expensive show car, and he had it up on the lift working on it. His wife didn't know it was home. Hits the door opener, it goes up and hits the show car. So yeah, it was bad. So you have to say,
story.
Yeah, that's a painful story. That's make you shed a tear a little bit.
So that's why, and we're going to be talking a little bit more of doors. So we'll get right to that one about the doors and the roll up doors.
Skip ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no. I want to clear up the frames designs, because I know your building, which was on our channel, beautiful building by the way. It's got the wide span trussing.
Right.
So it's the commercial WolfSpan trussing. And those also take up a lot more space. And then also the frames are about, at least for a 40 wide, it's around like a foot 6 inches, about 18-inch wide.
Right.
So those are things to keep in consideration. The red iron, the design of that beam, to keep that into consideration if you're staying within 12. Now, obviously, if you go higher, then you're gonna have a lot more space. So it's very, very important, for as far as like the frame type, to ask your salesperson, and we can even send you guys a sample design of how the truss is going to be.
Yep.
So you can really envision the clearance and make sure, especially if you're limited at 12 foot, because HOAs can have limitations.
Yep.
There's different ways. I mean, HOAs can have limitations on or HOAs or permits on your square footage, which would impact your usable space around, or on the height. So those are the ones that can really limit what you can do. And here's another question, James, that we were just talking about the overhead doors, which we'll get to that. Light fixtures and fans.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that is something to really consider, especially if you're really planning to put like a big ass fan. Is that the name?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And depends how much they're gonna hang.
Right.
You plan for that, and the light fixtures. Any thoughts on that specifically from your experience?
No, that's exactly right. You have to take into account where you're mounting fans, how much they hang down. That's why it's important. Like you said, prior planning. I geeked out on that on both of mine, with the grid paper and figuring out elevations and where to move everything and things like that. For lights, overhead doors, if you open your overhead door, then it kills all your lighting underneath there. So do you need to kind of move, or I've seen some that are wall mounted at kind of an angle. For lifts, it's kind of a pain because everything's visible and you lift it up and then it covers all your lights. So now everything's dark underneath. They sell LED strips that mount on the posts. So they actually shine inboard and up a little bit, so it illuminates underneath. So you're not always like moving a magnetic flashlight around, things like that. So that helps. But the clearance is important, because depending on what lighting, I know the UFO lighting usually has a little eyelet on the top, and you can anchor it. However, whether you're mine, I'm using magnets. They actually have a 27-pound high strength, rare earth, whatever magnet, and you put those to the trusses, because I'm not going to drill through mine. So you stick it to there and hang it off there and then wire it. But you have to take into account how much it hangs down. And then same thing for fans. Fans, sometimes they'll have different methods of mounting that hang down a little bit too much or whatever. And then fan blade, some of them go up to 14, 18 foot. So do you need to, if you're going to have your lift here and the car is going to be here, do I need to put some lights here? And do I need to move my fan inboard or away? So it's kind of all, just moving pieces of the puzzle around to make sure everything fits and you're not going to smack your car.
So there's a lot of planning that has to be really planned out, and especially when it comes down to the frames, the light fixtures and all that. But James brought up a really good point, which is overhead doors and roll-up doors. So we're going to go into that question right next. And that question is, James, we kind of started talking about it, but how do I integrate, with the overhead doors and like roll-up doors?
So depends on size, your leg height of your building, style of building, where your doors are. If they're side mounted, if they're side, where it comes in through the side, or if they're coming in through your gable end, those kind of change how you're going to mount doors and how you can, position your lift. So you have to take into account that. If you have the roll up doors, that's easy. They just coil up and, and they're pretty non-intrusive to your space.
Yep.
Whereas overhead doors, if it's a 12-foot tall door, well, it comes up, but then it comes in 12 foot. So say you have a 10 foot high, 12 foot high, whatever, you have to picture that it's going to come into that space.
Yep.
So if you have a vehicle that, say it's a truck with a topper, or it's, a very squared off vehicle, you have to take that into account and do proper planning. We've adjusted leg heights on buildings before, and we went from a 10 to 12 foot leg height. And he was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a 12 foot door. And I'm like, oh, hold on. If you do that, then it pushes it and it gets too close. We can sketch it out. We can kind of figure it out. But if you stay with the 10-foot door, because you don't really need a 12-foot door for that, for just pulling cars and trucks in. So it gave him ample room to where he didn't have to get, that door didn't come close, because he wanted it close to the lift, close to the front door.
That makes sense.
So that all comes into the kind of the planning of placement in there too, because say you're 40 deep, do you want the lift up close to where you're pulling on, or do you want what we call the flatland spot? Sometimes car guys are horrible about this. You put a car on a lift, I'm going to finish this in like a month. And, 2 years later, it's still on the lift. I guilty. But so which one do you want to use more? Do you want to use your lift space more, or do you want to use your flatland space more? So do you want the lift in the back, to where you could pull a vehicle on it, you could lift it, you can work on it. Okay, well now, Wise car, or we're going to get hail this weekend, so you put another vehicle underneath it and then put another one behind it. Or do you always want it up front because that's your work area, that's your machinery area, that's your woodworking area.
Yeah, and you have a garage,
whatever.
You can park anything.
Right. Yeah. So you kind of got to plan that. We always ask like, okay, we know reinforcement squares, we know everything like that, but where do you want it in your shop? And another thing, car guys are kind of indecisive. So we may do it to where we put squares, reinforcement squares, and they're like, man, I kind of really wanted it back there. If you don't know, then we could do thicker slab, and then you have the option of being able to move it around later.
That makes sense.
So, yeah.
And we'll get to the slab reinforcements. So I know that is also a big question. As far as like the overhead doors, as you're mentioning, basically getting different types of tracks is how to solve, the standard track of an overhead door will go inward. So it usually takes away your internal space, or at least internal overhead space. So there's high tracks, there's follow the roof line tracks, vertical tracks. They're all basically the same in a way. Basically, they raise your doors and they move them up to really, follow the wall or follow, the roof line, just to give you that overhead, a clear space. But I think you brought up a really good point. Sometimes it's, if you only need 10 foot tall, the track will solve the problem.
Right.
Especially that increase in price could still save you by not going up to a 12 foot tall door.
Right.
Just to get it over, you could just get that vertical track or so that's the beauty of the overhead doors, is like it's so customizable. The roll-up door, which is just rolls up into a coil, that's one of the advantages of it. It's just that you don't have to be dealing with that tracks, right? They're garage doors, but they're just different. They're completely different.
The track differences are crazy too. Like I didn't even know about those until I was on the phone with Ernesto playing in my building. He's like, well, do you want to follow the roof track, or do you want to highlight? And I'm like, what are you talking about? So I'd always been used to the ones that are just parallel to the ground.
Oh yeah.
And that's all. And then the old school openers, I hadn't even seen the side mounted openers. So now you can do, a vertical, or you can do a follow the roof. You can do one of those that just doesn't kill your clearance, and then do a side mounted door opener that's mounted on the wall, and it just, everything's out of the way. It's so nice. It's a lot less intrusive than the old ways.
It's different because like in residential homes, I mean, you got a wall, or like the heights are like 8 foot to 10 foot, like ceiling heights.
Right.
And so the tracks are typically always like this. You're never really going to see those unless you go into like commercial applications. And so with us, especially for metal buildings, that's why we offer those, because the roof, the full clear span is what allows. But then the overhead door standard track, which is just kill that overhead.
You might as well plan ahead and do the right track so it moves your door up and out of the way, so you have all this, extra room for activities. So
now let's go into another question. I know we kind of spoke about this a little bit, but can you tell me the differences between like the 2-post lift and the 4-post lift, how it can be an advantage when it comes down to the car lift location? Because I know you were mentioning that was really insightful of like really planning where you're going to have. And if you have a 2-post lift, you're telling me that if it's anchored, that's where it's locked in. If it's a 4-post lift, it kind of gives you that flexibility, right?
Right. So 4-posts will be a lot easier to move. If you put it somewhere and you're like, man, I kind of don't like this location, I want to put it to the back and, use this flatland spot, or the wife wants a spot to park her car or whatever. So if you want to move it back, those are a little bit easier. And you can always move a 2-post too. You just have to, disassemble it, lift it off. You either punch them straight through or you cut them off flush. And then you always have them. If you ever go to old car shops, you see there's bolts where they moved, and
they're moving them around.
So that's why it's important. You figure out like what kind of lift, ish, you know, or at least tell me it's a 10K 2-post, and we can kind of go from there. But what vehicle are you going to put on it? Because different vehicles, you rack them differently. You know, we did one on, we did a lift and a bunch of work on a truck, and it was a crew cab, long bed with a topper. I mean, that thing, you like have to register it in 2 counties. It's so long. So you have to kind of be careful with that, you know? So
The center of gravity.
Yeah. So you're looking at it, you're like, man, that seems sketchy, you know? And of course there's reinforcements you can put under the back, and it's safe. I'll still put the kid under, no problem. But you kind of have to figure that out, because, you know, measure in from, if you're going to put it close to the door sill to X. You know, if you say, we did a lot of chargers, you know, so a Hellcat chargers, you know, say 18 foot or 16 foot 8, that's how long it is. Or if I do Fox body Mustangs, they're a lot shorter. So I could have it a little bit closer to the door. But it really depends on what you're racking as to where you place the lift. Otherwise, you'll run into a thing where you lift it, you start getting stuff disassembled, you get ready to lower the door, and you can't lower the door because you're hitting the back of your vehicle or something like that, something silly. Or a buddy comes over and you can't work on their car. So you kind of plan that accordingly to what you're working on, what you're racking, things like that. If you have, you know, like a C8 Corvette, the center of gravity is different. So I can center it a little bit better to where it's not so much hanging off the back. But are you also going to work on big diesel trucks that do hang off? So you kind of plan that depth. And the reason it's good to plan it, not only for that, but it's kind of annoying if you put it like, just put it in the middle, and then you put it in the middle and you have it, you know, in the center, but then you have 5 feet in front, 5 feet in the back, and you're like, man, I could have used that space a little bit better. I could have put workbenches and toolboxes up front. So planning is important. Figuring out the placement of it on, you know, like an architectural plan or on a floor plan is really important.
Interesting. That is very interesting. I'm learning a lot. Man. I know the other day you and I were on the road, and you were talking to me about your car, your race car, and all that kind of stuff. And I was really just intrigued how there's a whole different world. There's so much to it about cars. Just kind of like construction of like metal buildings. There's like so much that goes into it. We don't even stop learning. Like every day I'm learning something new, and it's just crazy. So now that we were just talking about the floor space, James, let's talk about the foundation for a car lift. Okay, so what are the typical specific foundation requirements based on what you've experienced, and also what we did a little bit of actually we've been dealing a lot with it because clients call us and they're like, hey, and they send us the specs and stuff like that. So
Right. So if you say no one's planning a lift, our common slab, depending on your area and everything like that and usage, is going to be a 4 foot or 4 inch thick slab, 3,500 PSI. Okay. So that's just common. So if you look on the requirements of most of these lifts, they're going to say 4 1/4, which is odd, 4 1/4 and 3,000 PSI. So, somebody in the back of the mind like, oh, 4 1/4, 3,000. Well, WolfSteel's at 4 inch, 3,500. So I should be good. We don't do that. We don't take those risks. So the best way to do it is you do reinforcement squares. And that's what we did on mine. We kind of figured that out. Now we talked to bin pack techs and everything like that. And so if you know where you're going to place your lift, 4 foot by 4 foot and go a foot deep. So you have plenty of anchorage. Most of the time they'll tell you, like on those slabs, when they say, okay, we're going to do a 4 inch, it's a 6 1/4 inch long by 3/4 inch diameter anchor. Same type of anchors that we use for the tubular buildings, just a lot bigger.
Wedge anchors?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, wedge anchors, but I mean, they're massive.
Yeah.
So, but if you, say you have a professional come out and install it, you tell them how thick your slab is. What they want to do is try to get as much concrete as possible. Most of the requirements will tell you we'll do a 6 1/4 inch or 6 1/2 inch anchor. So what that means is if you have a 4 inch or 4 1/4, 4 1/2 slab, you're going down to the bottom, but they don't want you to punch through, because then you're losing that grip, that anchorage. You're picturing a big old vehicle on anchors that are only 4 inches down. But if you had more concrete, it would be stronger. So what we do is that 1 foot deep, then you can go up to a 9 or a 10-inch anchor. You know, you can really anchor that thing. You know,
It doesn't cost that much.
no, it really doesn't.
It really doesn't. Especially if you really plan where your location and we put those squares. Even if the requirements do say, you know, like 4.5 or up to like 7, I read in the specs of Benpack. Again, thank you for having this resource online. But I know that every car lift will provide you, you know, the specs that they want, right? But it's always better to do more than what is being asked as a minimum.
Right.
And the squares that we do don't even cost that much. Now, if you wanted to do like, say, a full 6, 7, 8-inch slab all the way through your whole square footage, well, yeah, that's going to be really pricey. But just the squares to have more for your anchorage to grab onto doesn't really cost that much. It's just a couple hundred, not even in the thousands.
Yeah, and it's like I said, when we're talking about safety and, you know, your show vehicle or your brand new car or whatever, or putting your family underneath it, to me, it's a no-brainer. You know, thicken up the concrete squares, have a lot more anchorage. It's a no-brainer. It's a lot safer that way.
Also, we should not install over like expansion joints or control joints, or like that's where you're going to be anchoring. And we're talking specifically about 2-post lifts, right?
Right.
Because 4-post, you can anchor. Well, it's recommended that you anchor, but you can still move them around,
right,
or something like that. But do not install over expansion joints and control joints, which we do control joint standard unless the client says, no, I don't want control joints. James, that's something that we can control through our architectural planning.
Absolutely. We'll look at that. We'll look at the concrete floor plan and everything and say, okay, our control joints are going to be here. And say the client's like, well, that's really where I wanted my lift. Well, we could probably shift our control joint a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, and the reason they don't want it on that control joint is when you put that cut, that's if you ever had cracking, they want to kind of localize it there. And so you don't want to put your lift there because, you know, it's almost like a perforated edge, you know, that's where we want it to have a little, you know, hairline crack in that if it is. So you don't want it there. You don't want to like score it, you know, it's kind of like cutting glass. You score it and you don't want it on there. So they want you 6 inches away from that for any of your anchors.
That's perfect. And then another, according to Benpack, concrete must be fully cured, which is like 28 days, really. See, we pour the concrete and then we do the building. The building comes in 3 to 4 weeks, so really you can't really put the lift on us, you know what I mean?
and they're basing that off the American Concrete Institute, you know, standards.
Yeah.
They'll take their density measurements or whatever, and everything's always a 28-day cure. So, you know, they don't want you just pouring a concrete and the next day like, oh, it feels good, let's go ahead and put our lift on there. So they'll want to make sure that it's 28 days cured. And then the good thing about that, when we talked about the 3,000 versus 3,500, that's why it's also important to do that thickness, because if somebody else does your concrete, how do you know that it's 3,500 or 3,000 PSI? You know, so that's why it's important to do the thicker so that you have the more anchorage. You know, we're a little bit different. We require whenever we pick up concrete, we require the receipt that shows 3,500 PSI. And we've even had clients who are like, hey, I'm going to drive big trucks on it or whatever. You can actually get increased PSI, increased density of the concrete. So,
and here's another thing. So when we look at these requirements for the 2-post lift, obviously depending the 10,000 or like what you're. Today you might be a car enthusiast. Tomorrow you might be a school bus enthusiast.
Hey, it is.
And you might have
you know,
you
go to big trucks, and the big trucks aren't enough. So then you're like, you know, you got Bigfoot monster trucks right there. So
monster truck. So you got the squares that's gonna suffice for what you're trying to accomplish. You know, because things change. That's what happens with us with like clients that like buy a metal building and then later on they become like an RV enthusiast or and then it's like, dang, now I need another metal building to put my RV because it's going to cost me the same to take down the building and make a dollar.
Right.
So, and these squares don't, in my opinion, they don't cost that much
No.
to not justify doing it.
Right. So you could easily go from a 10K and say they're big trucks and they need to go to a 14K. Well, okay, unbolt those. And if the pads even don't line up, then you lob off the anchors, and then you can still drill and you still have the reinforcement squares. We would just offset, and then you could get your 14K or your 16K or upgrade later if you need to.
The Benpack, which is another quick topic is Benpack, when we were talking, which was the reason why we called them, was because they have like pre-existing slabs, and then like if you're gonna redo it again or whatever,
Right.
which was a little confusing, but that would make sense. Like if you wanted to change your car lift or make a new one or get a new one that was heavier and your slab is not suffice, it would actually require you to do the squares.
Right, right. They actually explain where you're cutting into it. You go down to, you know, dig down in there, and then they would actually have it belled underneath. So you're not just square setting down in there. They actually have it underneath. So everything's kind of keyed in together. So where you could put the posts on there and be safe. And that's what's great about ours. You don't have to bell underneath because it's all one piece slab with the reinforcement squares already there.
Monolithic board.
Yep, exactly.
And also you got to do some tie-in to the the existing. Exactly. So it's pretty interesting. Alrighty. Now, before we get into electrical requirements, James, I wanted to ask you real quick. We're now offering like polyura, like epoxy.
Oh yeah.
And sealants, you know, to protect the foundations. And especially if you're like a car guy, you're gonna have oil spills. Concrete definitely is like a natural absorbent, like a sponge. So it definitely, I mean, I've had to clean. One time it happened, one of our lifts that we were using to build a metal building, right, was just had a leak going on. And overnight, you know, and the client says, and I'm over there cleaning it out, and it's almost impossible to clean out.
It is.
So, you know, if a client, more than likely, if you're going to be doing like a shop, I'm assuming you're more than likely going to put some sort of a sealant or elevate or increase it to like a polyura epoxy type of coating.
Yeah, I would definitely suggest that, because, you know, whenever my kid and I, when we were working, I was like, okay, don't spill anything. And our rule was, if you spill something, you stop what you're doing, you clean it up.
Oh.
But if you have normal concrete, it's already too late. As soon as the drop hits the ground, it's absorbing, whether it's gear oil, transmission fluid, oil, even antifreeze, it'll leave a stain. And then after a while, it just looks terrible. You know, you spend all this money on this beautiful concrete, and then it looks terrible because everything leaks on it. So that was one of the first things in my shop in Hawaii. Before we put anything in there, I didn't even have power, nothing. I went in there and I epoxied the floors.
Gotcha.
Because I know it's going to get dirty. I know even cars sitting, you know, a lot of times the tires come in hot from the highway, and you park there and then you back out, and now it has you can see where you were parked the night before.
Wow.
So, and I'm a little OCD about stuff like that. So I would say yes. A little? Yeah, a little. A little. So I would definitely coat the floors. And do you need to coat it before or after a lift? No. Technically, because once the post is on there, you're not going to see it. It's going to be butted up. You know, they can mask it and they could go up alongside. My OCD would probably say I have to do it first, because I know under that 2-post lift that it's not coated right there, and it just would probably bother me, but that's just me.
That's why you're the planning manager. That's why that was the biggest.
Yeah. But honestly, it could go either way. So say you got the lift and, you know, you didn't have the funds for it or whatever for the epoxy yet. Now you're like, okay, now, I see them, they're doing, you know, polyurea now, or epoxy, or polishing floors or whatever. I'm going to go ahead and do that. It would be wise, because you invested in the building, you invested in the concrete, keep it nice.
Yep.
You know, it's when your buddies come over and, you know, you got oil stains all over the place. So don't look at that. So it is nice. And I mean, honestly, you walk into the building, you're like, man, this is beautiful. And you look at the floor, like, wow. Mm-hmm. And some of the coatings those guys are doing are phenomenal.
Yeah.
So that's a no-brainer.
Especially from like oil and like greases like that.
Right.
No, that's awesome. Now let's get into electrical requirements. James, talk to me a little bit more on electrical requirements, because I know it's something that we're working on. We're currently in the process. I know you've been working with, you know, electrical to bring on into our team, because it's something that a lot of clients are asking for.
Right.
So I was like, well, let's talk a little bit about it. What kind of, you know, requirements are needed for the specific car lifts, like a 2-post and the 4-post?
Right. So scissor lift and 2-post or 4-post, a lot of times they're 115 volt, just normal plug-in. Some of the bigger ones will go to where they're 220. For most 2-posts, they're going to be 220. It's one motor. It's, you know, it's awful strong. It needs to be able to move the hydraulic fluid, you know, the fluid through there. So it is important. But most of them are going to be like a 220, like a 30 amp, 40 amp. Some of them are 50 amp. So you just kind of look at them. I know some of the older lifts and some heavier lifts, they'll be like 440, 480 volt, like 3-phase on a lift. So luckily, most of them nowadays are just 220 common amperage, so it's not a huge detractor.
And another question is like for running electrical, depending the location, how big your shop is, would it be wise to have it like a rough in right where it is, or because I know like for islands, like in homes, like islands, you do run a rough in to be able to not have the an electrical line coming in overhead or as a tripping hazard.
Right. So what you can do, I've seen them done multiple ways. I've seen guys run conduit along the floor where you have to step over it, but I hate that. It's a trip hazard. If you're planning accordingly, just like doing rough ends for electrical coming into the building or for sewer lines or plumbing coming in, you could also, if you know where your plates are going to be, if you know, you say, okay, I'm doing a bin pack 10 AP, or I'm doing this lift and this is where I want it. Well, okay, I can take the measurements. I know where your squares are at. I know your posts are going to be right here. So X marks the spot. That's where the conduit for your power needs to come up. And then you'll just have the little nub. And I mean, it could even be flush with the floor, and then they'll connect to it, and then they could run it up right to the control box.
Okay.
It's on one side, and that goes into the kind of the planning on where you're going to have, the actuator. It's only on one side. So you'll have your reservoir for the fluid, you'll have the motor, and then you'll have the control and the brake release all on the same side.
That makes sense.
So you could run it up that way, but say you forgot, like I didn't run mine because I wasn't really sure how I was going to wire it or whatever. So mine will actually follow the truss. It'll follow the brace bar, and then flex conduit comes down. And we did the same thing in Hawaii where it ran up hard conduit. It was only like 3 feet away from the wall, so hard conduit across and then hard conduit right down.
And the overhead door didn't obstruct or nothing?
Nope.
Okay.
Nowhere near it, because you got to think it's at the posts. And so you could run, the door won't reach that because it's coming from this side. So you have the flexibility, and really it's just, how do you want it to look visually? Some people want it like, I don't want to see any of that. So then we could tuck it in the concrete and run it up alongside. Or if it doesn't matter, it's not such a big deal. The easiest routing of it is just come across the top, drop it in. So there's ways to figure it out, finagle it.
Awesome. And another final, well, it's actually 2 more questions left. These are frequently asked questions. Are there any like specific restrictions based on HOA and permits on car lifts?
I have never seen anyone, dealing with permitting all the time. I've never seen anybody ask about that. Most of it's building, concrete, electrical, plumbing, stuff like that. They never get into that. I would say, even if they don't, I would hire a professional. If you have a buddy that's done multiple of these, but I've seen some guys like, hey, I'll just throw my own lift on. And when you watch the professionals do it, it is pretty straightforward.
Like to install the lift, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, set it in place, and then they just hammer drill, 3/4 inch bit, run it down 4 inches or 9 inches, whichever anchors you're going to go. Pound, you got to blow it out or vacuum out the dust, and then, anchor it down. It'll tell you, like, I think it's like 80 foot-pounds, no more than 110 foot-pounds. It'll tell you what the torque specs are. But cities and counties and HOAs don't really get into that. But just make sure you're comfortable in the install and you're safe in the install.
If anything, it's just more the square footage. That's where permits and HOAs get involved, like how much square footage, which would impact, like we had a client that like couldn't build bigger than a certain square footage. So he's like, well, how can I solve this? Because I'm trying to park multiple vehicles, but I still want a workshop. So what did he do? He did a mezzanine, right?
Yep.
So he raised his building height. The restriction was the square footage of the ground, but there was no restriction on the height.
They probably went back and rewrote that.
Yeah.
They probably added a height restriction.
The other client that we went to visit, he had multiple cars, so he solved it with a 4-post car lift. Put the car on top. Now he fits all his cars, right? So that's only restrictions from an HOA. From an install perspective, that makes a lot of sense, and especially like your slab, based on what I read, must be pretty level. There's a certain tolerance of a slope.
Yeah.
which is really hard for it to be more than 3% off. You know, it's gonna be really hard no matter who does it. But
the only thing you got to take into account is if you did a center drain and then they want to go ahead and, you know, have a little bit, you got to take into account like, okay, I'm gonna have a center drain because I'm gonna wash my car and my truck in there all the time, so I need a little bit of slope inboard. But then if I also want to lift, you know, they say no more than 3 degrees, so you want to make sure that, you know, those even out.
that's a really good point. The installation of a professional is probably really, really recommended, because I think they like shim it out or stuff like that. I did some research on that.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
in cases. Yeah.
Yeah. If you had a slope for a drain, then they can have shims under the plate on this side, you know, to make it perfectly. And they're very OCD on it. They'll have, you know, the laser levels. They'll have the kind of like we had at Fab, the digital angle finders, and it'll tell you 0.0 degrees. Or they're pretty cool.
They're
pretty
cool.
trick.
And the final question: how does the environment, like inside a metal building, affect the lifespan of a car lift? Is it something to be very, you know, like you must plan for it, or
No. Atmospherics will play a little bit into it, you know. If you're down by the Gulf and you have salt air, you know, in Hawaii they had North Shore and all the cars would rust away after a couple of years, you know, just because you have that constant barrage of salt air and mist. So if you're in a salty environment, you know, that may come into account. Most of the time when you have problems with lifts is when they're under like a carport or under a, you know, a lean-to out, like or just straight outdoors.
just the top?
Yeah, so they're just exposed to rain and snow and everything else, and then that does play. But if it's inside, you know, the shops are leak-free. I'm not saying you have to have, you know, 3 inches of spray foam, or it's just you have to maintain it just like you would your car. You know, it has the reservoir that has the fluid in it. It's just transmission fluid 90% of the time. So you could dip a white rag in there or a straw and it's like, okay, it's still pink, just like when you're checking your transmission fluid in your car. It's still reddish pink. Okay, fluid's good. Or if you're OCD and you want to change it every year, it's like 1.5 gallons, 2 gallons. So you could just, you know, keep fresh fluid in there all the time. And there's a couple spots that have grease erks, and you could just, you know, hit them with a little pump of grease. Wipe it down. If you're in a spot, say that you have your doors open all the time and there's always dirt blowing in, the chains that run up and over anything, you just wipe them down, maintain them. Maintenance on the lift is good, and that's why it's always good to go with a better quality, because some of them have like sealed bearings that you don't have to, you know, you don't have to maintain, you don't have to do anything with. You may have to wipe things down once or twice, but a lot of them, you know, just depends on the quality, you know, of the lift. That's helpful. You know,
little details.
Little
Details. Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. As far as like car lifts, I found it very interesting, and especially when you talk about them, it just blows my mind how there's a world about it, and then there's details about it to determine what the quality is of the product.
There is, because we sell to a lot of car guys. I mean, you know, every time you jump on there and they're talking about lifts, or, you know, on the Facebook page, you know, and you look at, you know, when you're approving their joining the page, and it's like, oh, I'm on that page. Yep, I'm on that page too. Yep, and it's all the car guys are all on the same pages. You know, and there's the joke, if you want to make car guy friends, you either have a lift or a car trailer. Oh. You know, so you got a lift, you're going to have more, you know, more car buddies coming by. But it is important, and it's important if you've never owned a lift or never worked on a lift. You know, you may think like, okay, well, I can just throw this in there and, you know, not have to worry about it. But safety first, you know, it's important. And then again, like you mentioned in the very beginning, placement, you know, the doors, the placement, you know, depth and everything like that, it kind of has to be planned accordingly. Otherwise, you're either going to have to do it again, or you're going to have a building that's, you know, you can't use your lift. Or,
and to make modifications on buildings, especially heights and heights, really, because we get those emails. Hey, my building's short. I kind of want to make it taller. The cost to make that is going to be a lot more. It's going to cost the same basically to get a brand new building.
Yeah.
So just a lot of planning is extremely important. And now that you mention it, let's take a moment, James, to promote the Facebook group where we are sharing. I know it's barely in the beginning stages, but we're trying to get some momentum on it. And I know you're the main person helping, you know, start conversations and stuff like that. So especially since you're very passionate, you're building your workshop into a really, really cool. Talk to me about it.
It's the car guy's dream shop. That's been the plan, you know. Like I said in the beginning, it was supposed to be like where I'm going to run my shop out of, but I'm not running a shop, so it's more for hobbyists, you know, for me and the kids and the family to sit out there and race car buddies to come over, you know. So the website's great because, or the Facebook page is great because we can share knowledge. You know, there was a gentleman that posted up there, you know, we only have a couple hundred followers on there right now, but there's multiple more that are coming in every week, especially when we start posting up more information. And I'm kind of detailing my build on there, you know, 40 by 80 by 12, you know, wide span. You know, we're doing right now where the guys are there right now, as a matter of fact, doing spray foam. And then later this week we have electrical, and I have it kind of built for the car guy's dream shop. So it's really great on there because I had a client that messaged on there and he's like, hey, I'm looking at fans. And I'm like, oh, cool. I'm doing fans right now. I just picked up my fans and I did a lot of research on the fans, you know, and the low speed, the high velocity, low speed fans, kind of like the big ass fans, that they move a lot of air. I had one in Hawaii, man. It was miserable if you didn't have that thing on, but you could run it at 60% and it's blowing stuff around.
Like right now.
Yeah. You couldn't leave it on at night because it'd set the alarms off because the papers or whatever would be blowing and flags would be moving, stuff would be moving around. So they move air. So we discussed fans and we discussed lighting, you know, where you want to place your lighting, and what type of lights and how they're mounted and everything like that, because I'm kind of an advocate for don't drill into your building if you don't have to, you know. So that's why we went with the magnets. And then come to find out, that gentleman I talked to on the phone here the other day, he was asking a question. I was like, hey, is this the same such and such, asking about fans? He's like, yeah, that was me.
Oh,
so
that's so cool.
Yeah,
world, man.
Funny coincidence. But yeah, it's a great place. And I'll see where somebody will join. It'll say where they work, and they may work for another steel building manufacturer, but they have knowledge. So, you know, that's what's great about WolfSteel, about the Facebook page is, you know, we're not trying to hoard all the knowledge. We're trying to teach everybody, you know, how trims are, how windows are installed, why it's important to do a door notch, you know, things like that. And then so we're kind of carrying that same methodology to the Facebook group. Educate everybody.
We're really not allowing anybody to promote, not even us. Exactly. Promoting is more an open forum or like a chat where people can share information. And we're there to also helping guys. Say you're having a problem with something and you want to know how to solve it. That's what we're there for, to help. So it's not a group where, you know, any business, especially if you're watching right now or you're a competitor or whatever, is going to go in there and post, you know, your products. It's not about selling products. It's about helping. And then, I think that's what I'm loving. And I'm loving your whole journey through your, car workshop.
Yeah.
So
it's
awesome.
Great. It's going to be fun.
Awesome, guys. And aside from that, guys, this is the final. I'm really, really excited for this to come out because I feel like we gave a lot of value, and a lot of clients actually are these type of clients. Like they are going to do a car lift. They are going to do, you know, like a 4-post lift or scissor lift or work on their cars or whatnot. But guys, if you have any more questions, leave them in the comments because James is also going to be available to answer them. And aside from that, also don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on all our social media accounts because we got Facebook, TikTok. We're in TikTok.
Yeah, everything.
And it's I don't even have a TikTok account. And also Instagram. And that's where you're gonna see a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that's going on in the actions. Any final questions, James?
No, sir.
Well, thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Hey Pat, as you know, we pull a lot of these questions and concerns from all social media platforms, especially Facebook groups. We highly encourage you to join these Facebook groups to seek answers to your questions. That's before, during, and after your purchase. One thing we noticed is that there isn't one specific to Texas, and for that, we created one. Don't forget to join there. Remember, our team is readily available there for you.